You think philosophy is about clever answers. But what if it's actually about learning how to stop fooling yourself? Because Socrates didn't build a system the way people build walls. He built something more fragile and more honest. A method for noticing when your certainty is just habit wearing a confident mask. And if you're here, that probably means you've reached one of those internal moments where the old language doesn't fully work anymore. You feel something slipping. Not your life collapsing, just your explanations. Like the floor is still there, but you can no longer pretend it's solid in the way you once did. So let us do a complete Socrates tutorial. Not as mythology, not as a history lesson, as a practice you can actually use on the thoughts you keep returning to when you're alone with your mind. Start by noticing this. When you say I'm fine, there's a part of you that believes the sentence, and a part of you that watches it like a rumor. Socrates would call that distance a beginning. He didn't treat it as a problem to eliminate. He treated it as a clue. The clue was simple. If something in you can't observe your belief, then your belief may not be your whole truth. So the first principle of Socrates' tutorial is not be skeptical of everything. It's more precise. It's be skeptical of the parts of your certainty that you never examined. That's why Socrates asked questions, not to annoy people, not to win debates. He asked so the ground under the statement could be inspected. And here's the second principle. If you can't define it, you probably don't fully understand it. Not in an academic way, in a human way. If someone asks you what you mean by love, success, freedom, or respect, and you can only respond with examples, feelings, or stories, then you're pointing at something while keeping the definition out of sight. Socrates would say, that is not clarity. That is camouflage. Now let us make the method complete the way you asked. I want to give you a full tutorial hook, framework, and practice steps, so it's not just a vibe. Socrates has a reputation for asking endless questions, and it's true. He used questions like a lens, but he also used a structure. The structure has 3 phases. The first is confusion, but a productive confusion. The second is uncovering what you actually believe. The third is transforming the way you think, so you stop using ideas like disguises. In modern terms, we might call it deconstruction, interrogation, and reconstruction. And it starts with a deceptively small move. He would ask for definitions. Not because definitions are magic, because definitions reveal boundaries. They show what your mind includes and excludes. They show what your thought can stand on when you remove the comfort of ambiguity. So here's the opening Socratic question, the one you can use today. Ask it to yourself, gently, without performing. What I mean when I say this. Let us make that real with a common internal script. You might say, I need closure. But if Socrates sat beside you patient, unseduced by slogans, he might ask, what is closure exactly? Is it a feeling? A final conversation? A moment in time? A story your nervous system learns to stop repeating? If you can't answer, you're not broken. You're simply at the beginning of clarity. Your mind is running a symbol, not a concept. And Socrates would not shame you for that. He would treat it like a map problem. If your GPS language is corrupted, you're not wrong as a person. You're just lost as a traveler. So what are you doing when you do philosophy the Socratic way? You're practicing intellectual honesty with emotional consequences. Because the truth is, many people don't avoid questions because they fear being wrong. They avoid questions because questions might uncover a desire they didn't want to admit, or a fear they didn't want to look at directly. And that is why your mind sometimes treats philosophy as threatening. It's not threatening because philosophy is cold. It's threatening because it might become warm enough to reach what you've been protecting. Socrates understood this. He understood that your beliefs are often tied to your identity. You're not only saying this is true, you're saying this is who I am. So when someone interrogates your belief, it can feel like an attack on you, even if it's just inquiry. But Socrates didn't start from hostility. He started from humility. He knew he didn't have the final answers, and he used that gap as a tool. So here's your first tutorial step. Adopt the beginner-esque posture. Not the childish posture of, I know nothing. More like the adult posture of, I might be wrong about this, and it matters. If you can do that, something subtle changes. Your mind stops defending and starts examining. Now, let us get to the irony phase, the part where your intuition might mislead you. Many people assume that if they feel strongly about something, it must be true. Socrates would gently challenge that. He might ask, what if strong feeling is not evidence of truth, but evidence of investment? Because investment can mimic insight. You can be emotionally certain and logically confused. Think about it. Have you ever been convinced of an explanation only to realize later that you just needed it to be true? That's not stupidity. That's the human brain trying to reduce uncertainty quickly. It's trying to soothe the nervous system. It's trying to keep you functional. But if you don't separate soothing from knowing, you end up living in a world built from relief rather than reality. So try this Socratic counter-question. If this belief were not emotionally satisfying, would I still believe it? It's a tough question. It doesn't accuse you. It reveals a dependency. And once you see a dependency, you can choose differently. The second ironic assumption is that philosophy is about holding answers. Socrates shows something else. Philosophy is about maintaining a clear relationship with not knowing. Not knowing can be boring. It can feel like loss. But Socrates treated it like a doorway. He'd rather bring you to a better question than flatter you with a quick conclusion. Because an answer can be wrong and still feel comforting. A question, however, can expose the structure of your mind. And that structure is what needs change. So in this tutorial, don't rush to conclusions. Instead, practice the discipline of returning to the question you're avoiding. What exactly am I claiming? What exactly am I assuming? What would make this claim false? Those questions are not academic. They're freedom. They prevent your mind from becoming a closed room. Now we move into the meieutic phase, the guided unfolding. Meieutic means helping birth, and Socrates used it as a metaphor. He believed people already have something inside them, but they don't always know how to draw it out into clarity. So let us do that with you. Imagine you're thinking about a specific theme in your life right now. It might be a relationship pattern, a career question, a sense of self that stays stable. Choose one topic. Keep it simple. Now answer this slowly. When I think about this, what story am I telling myself about why it's happening? Don't judge the story. Just notice it. Then ask the next question, what do I fear would happen if my story weren't true? This is the hinge. Because many philosophies fail because they stay on the surface. But the Socratic method goes underneath. It asks what your belief is protecting you from. Sometimes it protects you from grief. Sometimes it protects you from responsibility. Sometimes it protects you from the possibility that you might have been using the wrong criteria for years. And once you identify the protection, you can see the cost. So here asks the third question. What is the cost of continuing this belief? That cost might be emotional. It might be relational. It might be your willingness to try something new. Now, Socrates would likely ask for a definition again. What do you mean by trying? What do you mean by respect? What do you mean by being yourself? Because when definitions are fuzzy, your mind can keep looping without you noticing. It can call repetition growth. Now I want to give you a practical Socratic checklist, almost like a mental tool you can carry. When you're in the middle of a thought spiral, do these steps. First, identify the claim. What are you saying is true? Second, ask for the meaning. What does it actually mean? Third, test the boundaries. What would be an example that confirms it? What would be an example that contradicts it? Fourth, examine the motive. Why does this claim feel necessary right now? Fifth, consider alternatives. If there were a different explanation, what might it be? This isn't about becoming cynical. It's about becoming precise. And precision is a form of kindness. It protects you from believing your mind's worst guesses just because they arrive with urgency. Let us add the philosophical lens to make it complete philosophy, not just a self-help tool. Socrates is often associated with the idea that the examined life is worth living. But what does examine really mean? It doesn't mean you endlessly analyze yourself like a lab specimen. It means you refuse to live on autopilot, especially when autopilot is steering you toward confusion. Socrates wanted you to see that ignorance isn't just missing knowledge. Ignorance can be a blind loyalty to unexamined assumptions. And in Jungian terms, just as a metaphor, many people are controlled by contents of the mind they treat as facts. The personality is not just rational. It's historical. It's built from relationships, early patterns, and emotional learning. So the Socratic method can work like individuation in miniature. You separate identity from conditioning. You distinguish what you believe from what you inherited. Alan what's used to talk about how the mind mistakes its own patterns for reality. Socrates would agree with the spirit of that. The mind can create a story so convincing that you forget it's a story. Camus, later on, speaks of the tension between the search for meaning and the silence of the universe. Socrates doesn't solve that silence with a slogan. He makes room for the tension, and he asks you to behave ethically inside it. Meaning isn't only discovered. Sometimes meaning is practiced through honesty, through courage, through refusing to lie to yourself. So when you do Socrates' tutorial properly, you're not just learning logic. You're learning how to live with truth. Now we get to the reframe, the insight phase. Here, essay reframe that might land differently than you expect. Your problem might not be the lack of answers. It might be the fear that answers will require you to change. Think about that. If you're always asking, what should I do? You might actually be avoiding who am I really when I stop pretending. Many inner conflicts are identity conflicts. The mind clings to a self-image because the self-image feels safer than transformation. So Socrates would ask, what do you want that belief to keep you from becoming? If you can answer that, you may discover the real obstacle is not the world. It's your relationship with discomfort. And discomfort is not a sign you're failing. Sometimes discomfort is a sign you're finally touching reality. So here's another reframe question to hold gently. What if the point isn't to prove your view? What if the point is to understand your mind clearly enough to choose differently? That turns philosophy from a weapon into a mirror. Instead of using questions to win arguments, you use questions to reduce inner distortion. Instead of defending your ideas, you test them. Instead of demanding certainty, you practice clarity. Now, for the resonant closing, I want you to take one question with you. Not as an assignment, as a lantern. If you had to be honest for 1 minute, truly honest, what would you admit you've been assuming? And then, even more quietly, what would you do if that assumption were no longer automatic? Because that's the subtle promise of Socrates. Not that life will become simple, but that your mind will become more awake. Complete philosophy, in the Socratic sense, isn't a book you finish. It's a posture you return to, the willingness to ask, the willingness to define, the willingness to test, and the willingness to become someone who can live with questions without turning them into chains. And if you can do that, even a little, you're already beyond the point where you are merely reacting. You're beginning to participate in your own life. Point 3.